Welcome to the American Intelligence Media. I am your host, Thomas Paine. I'm with Michael McKibben, and we are continuing our conversation that we started, which we called, what'd you call it? Dark profiles?
Mm-hmm.
So, what we're talking about is something that I'm going to frame here, which is kind of scary. First time I heard about it, I heard it directly, I heard it on television or on probably in the internet. Eric Schmidt describing what he has intended for you. Eric Schmidt is the leader of Alphabet, which they say is the mother company of Google, which is a lie. Google was first, and Alphabet owns the 26 companies underneath Google. And some of those companies are scary. And the ones who break off of Google are the scariest. And they take an old company like Motorola and they turn it into what is going to now be the Atlas robot warrior, being built as we're speaking. It is ready. It's not built. It has been built. It's actually being used. So when we talk about some of these things, we're not exaggerating. All you have to do is, for instance, look up Google DeepMind. You see, each of these companies, that's the only artificial intelligence in the face of the earth right now, is Google DeepMind. And when they got it online and it had absorbed every single piece of digital information there was, and when it had learned to play 5 games at once, that wasn't enough. And win all the games playing against 5 human players, champions, at once. That wasn't enough. What it took was when the computer DeepMind, which is Google's, said, it asked the question, well, what would happen if I didn't make the next logical choice? And it had figured out if it made mistakes, it would learn about the humanness of the player and use that against them. And at that point, we actually saw the first evidence of artificial intelligence. So much of this is just big fat lies. But when we talk about Google, we're not just talking about a search engine. We're not talking about Gmail. We're not talking about Google Earth. We're not talking about YouTube. Those are all inventions stolen from our guest here, Michael McKibben. I'm talking about the really, really evil company, Alphabet, and what they have as intentions. And what they intend to do is net neutrality. The reason that they're fighting net neutrality is that gave them the ability to do whatever they want. Absolute impunity. As a private corporation, they could manipulate you with subliminal control. They could use any device that you happen to be accessing them as your permission to be manipulated for marketing purposes and also for propaganda purposes, which are now legal in America.
Or other business purposes.
And all other business purposes, like your 345-page, end user agreement. They have the right to do anything with the information that they get. And so if you are not aware of that, please go ahead and pinch yourself, wake up, and read one of our intelligence reports on the hundreds of patents and devices that are used by every corporation, and it's completely legal in America. So what did Eric Schmidt plan to do? Not only did he plan to take the presidential election, he planned to set up for each and every one of you a dark profile with not only just your medical information and all of your governmental information and all your tax information and every like you ever made on Facebook and every group you're in and every remark you ever made and every text you ever sent. It's all brought together and analyzed, and then they realize your own limitations, your envelope, what I would call your little box, and they make sure to keep you there. So they scrub the news for you to make sure that your liberal views are not insulted. They make sure that you only hear good things about Hillary during the election. This is what they were doing. This is the Eric Schmidt template for election, and which later became the United States Digital Service. So what I'm telling you, and I'm just setting this up so Micah can tell us the details, they wanted your freedom. They wanted your willpower. They wanted to drain you until every single second of your life was being sucked up by your cell phone. CEL. You're in a cell. You're in I call it a cube. You're in a box. You're in a dark profile. You are in prison. And they don't want you ever to look outside of that prison. And then they can get you to believe anything they want. And at any moment, as Michael always says, the end game here is they not only control all of your income and your bank accounts and everything else, when they want, they can turn off the switch. that's what you gave me as an image of where we're headed with this after I'd heard Eric Schmidt brag about what he was doing. So, what can
Well,
you tell our viewers about this?
well, I've already seen this movie, and in 30 years ago, I was taking gospel music groups into the former Soviet Union during probably the darkest days of the Cold War, and observed from the inside, working with free thinkers, working with dissidents there, a totalitarian system that controlled everything, just like you described. You didn't do anything without the government's position. You didn't get a job. You didn't go to school. You couldn't get ahead. You couldn't buy basic things like cars and materials for your house without the government being involved. And when we started looking into the background of the theft of our patent and digging into the people behind who did this to us, I kept saying in the early days, "Oh man, this looks like what I saw in the Soviet Union." And the more we've researched, the more clear it's become. There is an attempt by this group of elitists to basically return us to that totalitarian state where there is no private property and you are a vassal of the state. And how they're going to do it, unfortunately, is through a dark version, or they're going to control the digital aspect of this through a dark version of our invention. And the truth of this is starting to slip out from their ranks. And one of the first people to write about this that I saw was Mark Zuckerberg's former speechwriter, Catherine Loss, who wrote a book called The Boy Kings, which got a lot of press a number of years ago, or 3 or 4 years ago. And in it, she describes something called the dark profile. And so when people say they're getting off of Facebook, for example, the fact is that's not true. The fact is there are already profiles developed on every one of us on the planet. That there is a user profile which has everything except you having a user login and password that keeps storing on an ongoing basis all information about you that's encountered in the digital system. It's called a dark profile. Well, in the hands of a tyrant, this is the ultimate form of control, which they can do sitting around in their pajamas from an iPad. And so this penchant of this drive to have only one network, have only one interface, to have only one database that has everything about you as you've described, is in the hands of a tyrant the ultimate mechanism of control. And so that's what is so disturbing about, for example, Amazon, for example, wanting to control distribution, and how the whole market is allowing a few companies to control all distribution and trying to get people, instead of going to the store, to rely on getting shipments every day to their house. Well, that's fine as long as the system works. But what if a tyrant decides that you don't deserve that order of food that you just made with your iPad? And what if the grocery store doesn't deliver it to you? What do you do? So it becomes very easy for someone with ulterior motives or evil motives to completely control your life. And that's where we're going. And that isn't the intent that wasn't my intent for our system. My intent was to empower people to live their lives and be creative and to be innovative and to enjoy the diversity of human life and life on this earth, not to be controlled by a tyrant who wants to, who gets their jollies from telling other people what to do.
Well, your invention created the quantum leap into global communication, global awareness, global consciousness, and we weren't ready morally for that. We see that because when they saw what your invention was bringing forth, they set up a whole group to steal it, to manipulate it, and to turn it into one thing, which is one control, one global control. And we were so close to that, and Hillary was so close to that. And it's not American control. That's in our conversation about net neutrality, we pointed that out. America owns the internet, and once it goes overseas, okay, yes, we have partial investments in many of those lines, and we may not own them, but that isn't the issue. The issue is the routing and the computing and the cloud computing goes on here. We control the internet, but the internet is not being used for America. It's being used for transnational globalist intent. And the people who sold out, what did you call them? The young kings?
The boy kings.
Boy kings, exactly.
That's what
they're
Catherine
boys.
Loss.
They're dudes, like Dude Zuckerberg and these other silly people who they can't even answer questions about the systems that supposedly they created the innovation for. So when we're looking at this, we're looking at globalism. Now, globalism, I hate vague terms. Let me be very, very specific. We were close to having the New World Order, which George Herbert Walker Bush announced at the United Nations when he became president, that whether you like it or not, it will happen. As he said, it will happen. And it was happening. They were pretty close. There's a number of branches that needed to get in line. First off, they needed the military. That was America. The United Nations created a resolution that got us into the Iraqi war. It bypassed the Congress. From that moment on, the military of America was used by the United Nations until Trump came to power. Secondly, the economic system. That was controlled by the World Bank. The United Nations controlled the World Bank, the International Monetary Fund, the World Trade Organization, and basically the United Nations Aid and Development Agency. And that was aligned directly with the Bank of International Settlements. And I did mention World Bank, IMF, World Trade Organization. So they had that. It was ready to go. They only needed to get 7 more countries underneath the control of the IMF and have a central bank, and then they would have had that. So they had the military, they had the banking, and then they had the religious. They knew that there would have to be one world religion. And so the Pope has come out again and again against the Catholic Church with every doctrine that I know of. He has stood against as the new Pope, who is a Jesuit, of course, who, as I predicted long time ago, would get rid of the Black Pope, the head of the Jesuits, the Society of Jesus. I was a Jesuit. I take it quite personally. And then he got rid of the head of the Knights of Malta, and he became, instead of the white Pope, the gray Pope. And then he aligned with the United Nations Astana group in Astana, Kazakhstan, where they have set up a new home for the United Nations. And he basically the other day came out and said, we must start an organization immediately that will stop America, that is more powerful than America. He came out and said that. Those are the words of a dictator. So the religious side was ready to be set up. And also there needed to be a digital side. That was the U.S. Digital Service. Combine all digital aspects of the government and the state and everything with personal life, all connected to what you would call the Internet of Things. And yes, there was a global aspect. There was a human aspect of the Internet of Things for your home, controlled by your cell phone. There was the Internet of Things for your work. And there was the Internet of Things for your nation. There was the Internet of Things for the globe. And so they had this all set up, and it was being put out by Cisco Systems, who created all the routers with backdoors in them from day one, which was connected, of course, to the NSA. So what was about to happen? The global takeover of the world. And Facebook and Google and all those things which were stolen from your patent or your ideas, which would have become a patent, and your trade secrets and your copyrights. I always need to be careful when I say that because we got to be very, very careful when we say these things so that they can't be used against us. That's the reason we're very exact in what we say, or if we aren't, we qualify it. So going on, it is my opinion that they had many of the arms of the octopus in place, but they didn't have the ones that they couldn't solve. They couldn't get those 7 last countries into the IMF. They couldn't get Russia and China to fall for the IMF lure of special drawing rights, which is a currency that's been used from the IMF since the time of the Bretton Woods agreements in 1944. It was all set up since 1944 by Henry Dexter White. What was left? Here's the sad reality. Nations don't get along. Our beliefs do not coincide. If you think for one moment that Christians and Sharia law can live in the same space, you're incorrect. Just like the Catholics and the Protestants during the 30 Years' War. Humans don't get along yet. We're not evolved enough. And so these systems that you helped create, Michael, we were not evolved enough for them. What has become of them is exactly what our friend said in that question to you. Good luck in your battle against the Borg. Transhumanism, putting chips in your brain, using wireless from your brain to a mechanical arm or leg, or all the different things they can do. Turn your nose into the ability to see. All these different things. What is that? That is the Borg nature of the human being coming out. And if we don't have morality, that's the direction we're going to go. But we don't have morality. And countries don't get along. And especially countries that are right next to each other don't get along. And especially religions don't get along. So we weren't ready for the global takeover. But you did provide the global communication capacities. But look what happened to them. Are you disappointed by what has come of your hard work and your vision of a free global communication system for human beings?
Well, the only reason I brought it forward is because I still believed that we had a constitutional government that would protect patent holders. Certainly did not expect that the very man I went to in Washington to be my patent attorney would be one of the key advisors to this system that you just described. Call me naive, but I still think that even with all that bad news, I think human beings can rise to the occasion, and there is good and evil in this world. And what's that expression? Evil flourishes when good men do nothing. Mm-hmm. So if good men don't stand up and be the republic, then I think the inevitable will occur, like you've described. But on the other hand, I look at the history of our country and I see our founding as a miracle from God, that these very flawed individuals conceptualized a mechanism of government that could tamper the evil yearnings within the human soul, and that we could rise above ourselves, and we could, as you say, rise to a higher level of consciousness by choosing to be moral. I mean, life is choices. And unfortunately, a lot of these people we're talking about have made evil choices. And by the same token, human beings can choose good choices, can choose moral choices. And that's what I hope happens as we move forward.
And the question we keep getting again is, tell us about the Miller Act. We've asked you to tell us about that a few times. I'll just summarize it. You have a win-win-win proposition for American taxpayers, for the people who were ripped off, your shareholders, yourself, your engineers, your $20 million of investment, as well as for the president, that he could disassemble Silicon Valley's control of the White House and the U.S. Digital Services take over of the human domain of the individual by the digital domain. The virtual domain is taking over the real domain. That's what's really happening here. It's a globalist virtual domain trying to take over the nationalist reality. And with Trump just simply standing up for the rule of law, we get to see that things change tremendously. If he looked seriously at patent law, he would simply say, no. Right. All these new corporate laws and everything that James P. Chandler III ever wrote is abnegated as of this day, because they are simple corporate imperialism. That
the
is
ultimate. The ultimate is the America Invents Act that Barack Obama passed with David Capos, who had become Patent Office Director then. I mean, you talk about a law full of euphemisms and false statements and misdirection. It sounds great, the America Invents Act, but in fact what that ushered in was a complete attack on innovation in America.
And we see that in the new Supreme Court case. It could happen very quickly. Those Supreme Court cases, when they finally get on their dockets and they make their determination, change things overnight. And so they could basically abnegate many of these things that have happened at the patent department, at the patent office, and also these, what are they called? Not appeal, the patent review.
Trial and Appeal Board.
Trials and Appeal Board.
Yes.
That one just makes me so mad I can't memorize his name because
I've had
I just
an
want to
encounter with him.
spit fire when I think of that. 92% of the patents they call back to review, they take from those inventors.
Well, here I have an example of that. When before David Capos resigned in 2013, and keep in mind he was with IBM for something like a 225 or 26 years. He ordered our patent into reexamination under a special order. No company, not even Facebook, had even asked for the order, and yet Capos used his some obscure rule that had never been applied, as far as I know, to order our patent into a special review. Now, we had already been reviewed twice and prevailed. Plus, we had had those same arguments raised at trial and won. So they brought back arguments that we had already won on 3 times. He ordered a new PTAB, Patent Trial and Appeal Board, secret court, essentially, in an agency. Now, this isn't a real court, so they're not even subject to the Constitution. We did not get due process. So they put together a 3-judge panel. The chief judge of that was a patent judge by the name of Stephen C. Siu, S-I-U. And to cut a long story short, they overrode our patent on all claims, all 35 claims we hadn't even challenged at trial. And we started digging into, several of our shareholders filed FOIA requests to find out about these secret judges. Most of the information they gave us was redacted, so we didn't get to see a lot of the data, but what they did give us showed that Mr. Siu had worked at IBM and Microsoft before coming to the patent office. Okay, so that is a breach of the rules for judges against conflicts of interest. We then look at the examiners who were also the judges, many of whom had been examiners, and the work that they had done in the patent office, and we counted almost 100 patents that they had issued for who? IBM, Microsoft, and Xerox. So this was an old boys club that was convened inside in a special court to kill our patent as David Capos leaves the office.
Michael, talking to you, all I can think of is the fact that these people must never read science fiction. They must have never seen Star Wars. Okay, how about the robot wars? Okay, Motorola, right now, the ex-head of DARPA, is making an army of robot warriors. Punch through a brick wall with its hand. Unstoppable, completely independent, can drive a car, whatever you want. He's got a dog that runs beside him that can...
So who are the idiots making the decisions to do this?
This is where I'm going with this. And can they not think this through? Why would you make a robot that could go independent? I mean, what was it? Oh, I didn't get to the point. Google Deep Mind was asked once everything was put into it that had been digitized. Every book, everything. Every video. And it said to Deep Mind, what do you think of the human being? And the first artificial intelligence said the following: keep the human being in the human being zoo. Now, if that doesn't tell you that that machine should be turned off right at that moment and never turned back on again, and if that doesn't tell you the future of machines and transhumanism and cyber wars and robot wars and clone wars and transhumanism, then you're just stupid, folks. Just read Robert Heinlein. Read anybody in science fiction who takes the moral issues of what happens when science, without any mitigation, without any slowing down, just keeps inventing for the sake of inventing. It goes to the worst. It goes to the lowest human common denominator. It goes into evil. It goes into greed.
That's the whole point of life as choices. And if you continue to make choices that are going to be detrimental to humanity, sooner or later, we're going to suffer the consequences. So these idiots are making bad choices. They need to be stopped.
How do we stop them, Michael? Can anything be... there should be like...
We have something called a republic. And as Benjamin Franklin said, we're going to give you a republic if you can keep it. We, the citizens, we, the people, have got to step up and stop this.
Exactly. And unfortunately, it comes back to when they asked Benjamin Franklin that, he said, if you can keep the republic. It's just like property. He was for having a land bank where you own your land, you never pay taxes on it, and the fact that you bought that land gives you credit in your bank, because that land always becomes more valuable as you till it, as you work on it. That is what property is supposed to be. That's what your invention was supposed to be. So I think that this review board, this review committee in the patent office needs to have moral people running it, not the Department of Defense.
I think it's even better than that. It's not the purview of the patent office to give and take away contracts. Contracts is a constitutional process. So the idea that an agency of the government outside of due process can take away real property is an unconstitutional concept. No, they ought to be shut down. They should not be allowed to do that. If you want to challenge my patent, you do it in open court. You don't do it in these secret courts where these immoral people are allowed to be signed and then have no accountability.
And stealing the patent for weaponization for military purposes. So we got to get the military out of patents, and we have to perhaps bring before the Congress in open public hearings new discoveries that need to be debated. For instance, right now they are cloning human beings in St. Louis, Missouri. I almost fell over when I heard that. It is now legal as long as you harvest the embryos. Okay, that's not going to work out very well. How about this new virus that a guy just experimented by shooting people up in Canada with the virus just to see what would happen? Okay, who is stopping this type of horrifying experimentation? One bad virus, one bad invention could be the end of humanity. We have to stop playing with fire, folks. We have to stop thinking that we're God and just invent things for the sake of inventing them because I want to make more money or power or lust, or I do it for the military, or the ultimate pathetic excuse. We have to do it. We have to make this weapon before the enemy makes that weapon. Well, in America, when we make a weapon, we also give it to Russia and China and everybody else so that there's competition. So when we weaponize something, it's given over to everyone else. We need to stop that here in America. We need to put morality back into scientific invention and just simple common sense. Please do not invent a negative antimatter bomb because it could blow up the whole earth. Don't try that one, folks.
Well, we need to heed John Adams' statement, or acknowledge that he stated, our Constitution is intended for a moral people, and it doesn't apply to any other. So I think we've gotten away from the notion of the responsibility of the citizens of the Republic, and what we have done is we have leaned upon too heavily our constitutions and our laws to try to be the moral arbiter. It is not a moral arbiter. It is a guide for moral people. Moral people. So therefore, we've got to really look hard at our system of governance so that we can put in place these checks and balances that are needed to deal with these issues. I mean, there's no one right answer to anything you've just raised necessarily, but we've got to have the dialogue. We can't have these secret tribunals making these decisions for us. It's got to be open.
It couldn't be said better than that, Michael. And I just want to thank you, because morality really, it must be brought back exactly as you just described. So thank you so much for addressing this issue of these dark profiles and for going into some more further explanation about patents. Your insight comes through so clearly because of your own morality and what it is that you have gone through. And I can say that if I was you, I would certainly not be as moral as you are. I would be a very angry, upset person. So I must say, your morality shines through like the sun. Thank you so much.
Thanks for having me.